Hello, knowledge seekers. In this episode of 20-Minute Books, we explore the Congo from Leopold to Kabila, a profound historical account written by Georges Nzongola-Ntalaja. The book offers an in-depth look at the history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo from the time of Belgian colonial rule through the tyrannical reign of Mobutu, the devastating Congo Wars, and into the continuing unrest at the turn of the 21st century. Nzongola-Ntalaja, a noted Congolese scholar activist and expert in African politics, brings a rich insider perspective to the narrative, shedding light on how external exploitation and internal frailties have impeded the nation's democratic aspirations. He also discusses potential pathways forward for the Congolese democratic movement. This book is an essential read for anyone curious about Congolese history, students of colonial and post-colonial studies, and both Africans and non-Africans eager to understand African history from an authentic internal viewpoint. Join us as we delve into the challenges and hopes of a nation striving toward democracy, guided by the insightful analysis of a prominent figure in African academic and political circles. The Congo from Leopold to Kabila, A People's History. Introduction. From Darkness to Democracy, Traversing the Turbulent History of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Imagine a river so vast it links two modern nations, its name synonymous both with awe and a dark colonial legacy. The Congo River paints a vivid scene in Central Africa, stretching 4,380 kilometers across the continent. In the spheres of literature and history alike, this river has served as a somber symbol, particularly highlighted in Joseph Conrad's literary masterpiece, Heart of Darkness. Today we're uncovering the intricate and tumultuous history of one of these nations, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. This saga not only illustrates the Congo's colonial entanglements, but also its relentless quest for democracy. The story dates back to when Africa was carved up by European powers with little regard for native populations. By the mid-20th century, as African nations awakened to independence, the shackles of direct colonial rule were cast aside. Yet many, including the DRC, found themselves grappling with neocolonial influences. Foreign forces shaping their destinies under the guise of diplomacy or aid. Declared independent in 1960, the DRC's nascent freedom was immediately caught in the crossfire of the Cold War. The United States and its allies, fervently battling the spread of communism, saw Africa as a critical battleground. In the Congo, this global chess game manifested in the support of General Mobutu, a decision that would leave lasting scars on the country's democratic aspirations. For decades, Mobutu's regime clamped down on democratic movements, a period marked by repression and stagnation. The U.S., prioritizing its own geopolitical agenda over democratic values, played a pivotal role in stifling the Congo's parliamentary democracy. This interference set the stage for a prolonged struggle against autocratic rule. Mobutu, symbolizing his dominion and severance from the past, even renamed the country Zaire during his prolonged dictatorship. Yet, an even darker chapter was influenced by the enduring vestiges of colonial racism. The Belgian colonial mindset, embedded with deep racial prejudices, sowed seeds of division that would later contribute to one of the 20th century's most horrifying events, the Rwandan genocide. These biases, compounded by international indifference and strategic interests, facilitated a horrifying spiral of violence in the region. Through this exploration, the narrative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo unfolds, marked by foreign manipulation, a thirst for control, and the indefatigable spirit of its people striving toward the democratic governance they have long been denied. The tale of the Congo is not just one of conflict and intervention, but also a continuing struggle for sovereignty and democracy, echoing across the riverbanks of the mighty Congo River. Part 1. King Leopold II's dark legacy and the colonial exploitation of the Congo. Nestled in the heart of Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, spans a vast territory that was once divided among several African kingdoms, home to 250 diverse ethnic groups predominantly speaking Bantu languages. However, the historical trajectory of this rich and diverse region took a dark turn during the late 19th century. As European powers scrambled to claim their stakes in Africa during the colonial Scramble for Africa, the Congo fell into the hands of King Leopold II of Belgium in 1885 under the guise of a humanitarian mission. Far from benevolent, Leopold's true intentions centered around exploitation and personal gain. What followed was a brutal reign that turned the Congo into a personal profit machine for Leopold, particularly through the extraction of rubber and minerals. The atrocities committed under Leopold's rule are chilling. It is estimated that about 10 million Congolese lives were lost to the systematic abuse that involved horrifying acts of mutilation and rape used as punishments for failing to meet extraction quotas, or simply for defying forced labor demands. The world gradually became aware of these horrors, partially through literary works like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which drew on the bleak realities of the region. Public outcry eventually took formal shape with the formation of the Congo Reform Association, CRA, in the United Kingdom in 1904. This organization played a pivotal role in exposing the abuses and rallied international support, which in turn pressured the United States and other countries to oppose Leopold's regime. Yielding to mounting diplomatic pressure, Leopold was forced to relinquish his control over the Congo, transferring authority to the Belgian Parliament in 1908. Although this transfer marked the end of Leopold's personal rule, it didn't end the exploitation. Belgian colonial rule continued, narrowly focused on economic gains derived from the Congo's vast natural resources. The extraction of rubber gave way to the mining of copper, gold, diamonds, and uranium, while the dense forests were exploited for timber, and vast lands were used for cultivating cash crops like coffee, tea, and cotton. This transition from personal fiefdom to colonial state perpetuated a cycle of oppression and resource plunder that has consistently hampered democratic developments in the region. The prolonged extraction and exploitation set a precedent where external and internal interests often overshadowed the rights and well-being of the Congolese people, casting a long shadow over the prospects of democracy in the DRC that lingers even today. Part 2: The Rise of the Congolese Democratic Movement Amidst Colonial Resistance. The Belgian colonial rulers enjoyed a rather distorted view of the Congo as their model colony, a stark contrast to the harsh realities on the ground. Operating under classic colonial tactics, the Belgians implemented a divide-and-rule strategy, ensuring control by fostering divisions among the local populations, including rewarding local kings who sided with them against their own people. Despite these suppressive efforts, the seeds of resistance germinated within different layers of Congolese society, gradually growing into a collective movement that would herald the fight for independence. One early form of resistance came from within the colonial military itself. As early as 1892, mutineers, alongside some African chiefs and professional soldiers, openly opposed colonial authority, signaling the first signs of organized dissent. Adding a spiritual dimension to the anti-colonial movement was the Kimbanguist spiritual awakening. Founded in 1921 by Simon Kimbangu, a Baptist prophet espousing liberation from colonial dominance. The movement endured even after Kimbangu's imprisonment, fueled by its strong Pan-African ideology and widespread grassroots support. The labor sector also voiced its discontent, not necessarily calling outright for an end to colonial rule, but demanding fair wages and improved working conditions from their colonial employers. This groundswell of unrest among workers and peasants added a crucial socio-economic layer to the resistance movement. By 1956, the disparate strands of opposition coalesced into a more organized democratic movement, as three principal factions united with a common goal of seeking independence. The movement gained momentum particularly through the actions of the Evolués, an educated and politically active group who, despite being derogatorily deemed by the Belgians as a more evolved African elite, used their status to effectively push for national reforms. The size and intensity of the demonstrations and public rallies, led by the Evolués, brought the colonial government to the negotiation table, pressured by the looming threat of widespread violence. This tension crested on January 4th, 1959, with the bloody Kinshasa uprising, which tragically saw around 300 people lose their lives, but also underscored the unsustainability of Belgian control. The persistence of these movements finally bore fruit when the Belgian Congo achieved independence on June 30th, 1960, rechristening itself the Republic of the Congo. Elections brought nationalist Patrice Lumumba to the forefront as the nation's first prime minister, symbolizing the hopes of millions for a truly autonomous nation. Yet, despite these monumental changes, the new republic quickly found itself a pawn in the larger game of international politics, with global powers eager to exert their influence over the nascent government. The intricate dance between local aspirations and global interests continued to shape the country's path in the years that followed. Part 3: Decolonization turns to conflict, the unfolding of the Congo crisis. Patrice Lumumba's tenure as prime minister started under the hopeful gaze of a newly independent nation, but the Congo's aspirations soon collided with the realities of post-colonial power dynamics. The Congo crisis, as it came to be known, marked a turbulent chapter in the country's history, one characterized by internal discord and international manipulation. The crisis was catalyzed by a significant power vacuum left in the wake of departing Belgian administrators in 1960. With only a handful of trained bureaucrats remaining, tribal leaders and local authorities inadvertently found themselves wielding more influence than the central government. Amid this political turmoil, the Congolese military, still dominated by white European officers despite the country's independence, revolted against their superiors. This mutiny highlighted the lingering colonial influences and the fragile nature of the nascent government. Compounding these internal struggles were secessionist movements in Katanga and Kasai, two of the nation's wealthiest provinces. These movements not only threatened the integrity of the state, but also diminished Lumumba's authority, pushing him to seek international assistance. Initially rebuffed by the United Nations, Lumumba turned to the Soviet Union for support, unwittingly transforming the Congolese struggle into a proxy battleground of the Cold War. The UN, spurred by fears of Soviet influence spreading across Africa, shifted its stance, engaging more actively in the conflict. The United States, alongside Belgium and a now involved UN, began orchestrating efforts to undermine Lumumba, favoring a leadership they could more easily control. Their definition of a moderate leader was one malleable enough to satisfy Western economic and geopolitical interests, not the nationalist Lumumba, who envisioned a robust centralized governance and widespread political engagement. The preferred choice was Colonel Joseph Désiré Mobutu, who led a successful coup with foreign backing. Lumumba was detained on September 14, 1960, and replaced by Moise Tshombe, leader of the secessionist movement in Katanga, while Mobutu assumed command of the military. Despite his imprisonment, Lumumba remained a symbol of resistance, his influence undiminished. This perceived threat led to his grim fate. By January 1961, perceived as an enduring menace, Lumumba was brutally executed by the Katangan military, an act passively observed by Belgian officers. The Congo crisis encapsulates the broader struggles of the region during the 20th century, a poignant reflection of the tumultuous interplay between local ambitions and international power games, where global interests often precipitated local violence, turning the country into what was less a nation striving for stability and more a geopolitical powder keg awaiting ignition. Part 4: The struggle and suppression of Congo's second independence movement. The conclusion of the Congo crisis did not signify an end to turmoil or foreign interference in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The newly established government, perceived as a puppet of Western interests, failed to resonate with the aspirations of the Congolese people. This discontent fueled the emergence of the Second Independence Movement, a resurgence of nationalistic fervor that sought true democracy, economic rights for all, and liberation from foreign manipulation. Beginning in 1963, this movement took root in two primary regions, each with distinct approaches and challenges. In the western province of Kwilu, the resistance was primarily guerrilla warfare, led by Pierre Mulele, who had been trained in China. Mulele's campaign kicked off in January 1964 with a principled stance against looting, an effort to set his movement apart from the corruption that plagued Congolese political life. However, Mulele's movement suffered from critical shortcomings, including a severe lack of resources and external support. Additionally, its base in the rural Kwilu, rather than a major urban center, hindered its ability to resonate or receive aid on a national level. On the other side of the country, the eastern front of the movement was intellectually driven, organized under the Conseil National de Libération, CNL. This group initially achieved significant military success, overturning provincial governments across eastern Congo. Yet their victories were undermined by a lack of political strategy and internal cohesion. As the group gained power, internal disputes led to fragmentation, and soon enough, nepotism, repression, and corruption seeped into their ranks. Foreign interests continued to play a decisive role in shaping the country's fate. The movement inevitably caught the attention of Cold War superpowers, with the Eastern Bloc countries showing support for the resistance. In response, the United States, continuing its anti-communist policy, threw its support behind efforts to quash the movement. Key among these was Operation Red Dragon, a counteroffensive launched in November 1964 by Prime Minister Moise Tshombe with Western backing, which decisively weakened the CNL. The suppression culminated on October 3, 1968, with the assassination of Pierre Mulele by Mobutu's generals, a stark act that symbolically and practically quelled the resistance. While the Second Independence Movement ultimately failed to achieve its immediate goals, it left behind a potent legacy. It entrenched a culture of resistance to illegitimate authority and external manipulation, a sentiment that continues to influence Congolese politics to this day. This enduring spirit of defiance underscores the complex interplay of internal aspirations and external pressures that have shaped the Congo's turbulent journey towards self-determination. Part 5. Mobutu's Ascent and the Deterioration of the Congo under his rule. Following the suppression of the Second Independence Movement, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, under the short-lived government of Moise Tshombe, appeared to make strides toward democracy with a new constitution in 1964 and a relatively peaceful national election in May 1965. This period hinted at a potential democratic revival. However, external powers, particularly the United States, had reservations about the sustainability of this fragile democracy, fearing it too chaotic and inadequate for maintaining regional stability and their interests, in pursuit of a leadership they deemed more controllable and stable. Western powers backed General Mobutu, a figure the CIA had been grooming since the early 1960s when he was leading Lumumba's army. This maneuvering led to a critical juncture on November 24, 1965, when Mobutu seized power through a coup. Mobutu's subsequent actions seemed initially to signal a break from the past. He renamed the country from the Republic of the Congo to the Republic of Zaire, drawing from Nzere, a local word for the river, to signify a return to African roots and a purge of colonial influences, a process he termed Zairianization. However, this ostensibly noble vision of Africanization was superficial and masked deeper economic exploitation and corruption. Supported discreetly by Western countries, Mobutu embarked on a regime that would eventually be characterized as a kleptocracy. His rule concentrated wealth and power within a small elite, while the nation's economy, despite its abundance in natural resources, faced collapse. By 1975, the once promising nation was grappling with economic devastation. Soaring inflation, widespread poverty, and starvation became rampant issues. While Mobutu and his cronies indulged in opulence, splurging on luxurious estates, lavish gifts, and grandiose celebratory events, the general populace languished in deprivation. This stark disparity fostered what came to be known as the Zairian sickness, an epidemic of corruption and moral decay that plagued the nation. As Mobutu's wealth grew and his authoritarian grip tightened, a burgeoning opposition was galvanized with clear objectives: eradicate corruption and establish a new, ethical governmental order. This collective dissent aimed not merely at toppling a tyrant, but at fundamentally transforming the moral and political fabric of the nation, highlighting a desperate yearn for dignified governance and genuine independence. Part 6. The end of Mobutu's reign, external shifts, and the push for democracy in Congo. The demise of Mobutu Sese Seko's long-standing dictatorship in Zaire, now known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, was ironically hastened by the withdrawal of the very external support that had initially established and maintained his regime. Amidst this geopolitical shift, a domestic surge for multi-party democracy gained momentum, championed by a diverse array of Congolese factions and advocacy groups. Throughout Mobutu's tenure, various forces had been quietly laying the groundwork for change. The Catholic Church, exiled political groups, and a vibrant student movement demanding democratization on university campuses played pivotal roles in nurturing the seeds of reform. A significant turning point in the struggle against Mobutu's autocratic rule came during the Shaba Wars of 1977 and 1978. These conflicts, initiated by left-wing Katangese rebels from Angola, exposed the fragility of Mobutu's control over Zaire. In response to the invasions, Mobutu found himself compelled to seek military assistance from Western nations, revealing his weakened grip on power. However, this support came with strings attached. The United States, in particular, conditioned their aid on political concessions from Mobutu, including fair parliamentary elections in 1977, a significant departure from his typical electoral manipulations. This external pressure bore some fruit when the newly elected parliament began to assert its independence. In 1980, an audacious group of 13 members submitted a comprehensive demand to Mobutu for extensive political reforms, including the convening of a sovereign national conference and CNS to deliberate on the nation's future. Although these demands initially seemed to gain traction, they were ultimately met with harsh repression. The members of the Group of 13 Inches were arrested, tortured, and exiled, as external powers shifted their focus away from Africa. The conclusive blow to Mobutu's regime came with the end of the Cold War. The collapse of the Soviet Union nullified the strategic rationale behind Western support for Mobutu, who had been positioned as a bulwark against communism in Africa. With his international backing evaporating, Mobutu was increasingly vulnerable to both internal opposition and external diplomatic pressures. On April 24, 1990, amidst mounting pressures, Mobutu announced a forthcoming transition to multi-party democracy and agreed to the formation of the Sovereign National Conference. However, despite these concessions, Mobutu was reluctant to genuinely relinquish his hold on power, setting the stage for further political turmoil. This period marked a pivotal chapter in Congo's tumultuous journey towards genuine democratic governance, reflecting the complex interplay of internal aspirations and external influences that have shaped the nation's modern history. Part 7. The Sovereign National Conference, a hopeful start undermined by political maneuvering. The Sovereign National Conference, CNS, in Zaire represented a significant, albeit ultimately frustrated, attempt to chart a new democratic course for a nation long plagued by dictatorship and external manipulation. Convened with the participation of 2,842 delegates from varied sectors of society, the CNS aimed to confront Zaire's tumultuous history while laying foundations for a robust multi-party democracy. National broadcasts of the proceedings stirred a hopeful sentiment across the nation, signaling a pivotal moment in the quest for democratic reform. The CNS held ambitious objectives, examining the disappointments following independence and facing the depth of the ongoing political, social, economic, cultural, and moral crises. A crucial task was developing a comprehensive framework to steer the country toward a stable democratic governance structure. While the CNS excelled in critiquing the past, mismanagement, and outlining visions for the future, it faltered in translating these frameworks into actionable policies. Several factors contributed to the CNS's inability to enact its visionary framework. Key among these was the role of Monsignor Monsengwo, the conference's chair. His political opportunism became a significant hindrance as he frequently deferred to Mobutu Sese Seko, the nation's long-standing dictator, thereby undermining the process from within. Further complicating the transition was the inadequacy of the Le Compromis Politique Global, a critical document intended to guide the two-year government transition. Riddled with loopholes, the document became a subject of contention among delegates more focused on vying for power than fostering genuine political reform. This lack of commitment to substantive policymaking undermined the conference's credibility and efficacy. Mobutu, sensing the threat to his control, employed various tactics to disrupt the CNS's progress. In a dramatic display of power, Mobutu orchestrated the bombing of the Ugandan People's Defense Force headquarters in August 1992. Although his immediate goal to declare a state of emergency and suspend the CNS was thwarted, the disruption sowed chaos. Mobutu's influence continued to shadow the proceedings, with his candidate throwing the prime ministerial election into disarray, even though Etienne Tshisekedi eventually won with a substantial majority. Despite the CNS's initial success and Tshisekedi's election, the lack of sustained international support and internal divisions allowed Mobutu to execute his third coup on December 1, 1992, effectively dismantling the CNS merely days later. As Mobutu clung to power for another 5 years, the aspirations for democratic change remained unfulfilled, largely due to continued U.S. involvement, fixated solely on safeguarding its strategic interests. The CNS, despite its lofty goals and widespread national engagement, exemplified the challenges of transforming hope into tangible political reform against a backdrop of entrenched authoritarianism and external interference. Part 8. From Mobutu's Downfall to the Congo Wars. Regional unrest reshapes Zaire. The collapse of the Sovereign National Conference, CNS, and the return of authoritarian rule under Mobutu Sese Seko marked a dark period for Zaire, now known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. Concurrently, neighboring Rwanda and Uganda were grappling with their own severe political and ethnic turmoil, which inevitably spilled over into the DRC. Rwanda's deep-seated ethnic strife, a legacy of its colonial past under Belgian rule, set the stage for one of the most devastating human tragedies of the 20th century. The Belgians had instituted a system that not only categorized individuals by ethnicity on identity cards, but had also favored the minority Tutsis to rule over the majority Hutus. This arrangement sowed seeds of deep resentment. By the 1990s, radical Hutu factions were calling for the ethnic cleansing of Tutsis, culminating in the horrific genocide of 1994, where between 800,000 to 1 million Tutsis, about 70% of their population, were systematically slaughtered. The genocide was halted by the military intervention of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, largely composed of Tutsi refugees in Uganda. They overpowered the Rwandan Armed Forces, FAR, and seized control of the country. Fearing reprisals, about 1 million Hutus fled to Zaire, significantly shifting the regional demographics and increasing tensions. This influx of Hutus into Zaire provided the Rwandan and Ugandan governments with a pretext to pursue their military and strategic interests under the guise of border security. In 1996, with tacit approval from the United States concerned with its geopolitical interests in Africa, a coalition force invaded Zaire. The force was ostensibly led by Laurent Kabila, a Congolese rebel and a Tutsi ally, who had been active in radical leftist circles in Congo since the 1960s. Kabila was seen as the figure capable of ousting Mobutu and addressing the regional instability. Yet, the underlying motives of the coalition were far from altruistic. While the public narrative focused on border security and toppling a dictator, the true intent, largely obscured, was the exploitation of Congo's immense natural resources. This conflict, later dubbed the First Congo War, not only led to the overthrow of Mobutu, but also the massacre of thousands of Hutus residing in Congo. Mobutu, his health failing and his regime untenable, was forced into exile on May 16, 1997. The very next day, Laurent Kabila was declared president of the newly named Democratic Republic of the Congo. Kabila's ascendancy signaled the beginning of a new era, though the roots of conflict and exploitation that facilitated his rise would continue to challenge the nation's pursuit of stability and sovereignty. Part 9. Navigating a Path to Peace. The critical role of national dialogue in Congo's future. Following years of tumultuous conflict and instability, the Democratic Republic of the Congo faces a crucial juncture. The nation, substantially weakened after prolonged wars with Rwanda and Uganda, stands at a crossroads, with its future hinging on the ability to foster inclusive national dialogue and reconciliation. The Congolese people found themselves grappling not only with external aggression, but also domestic tyranny under President Laurent Kabila. Kabila, who initially seemed like a puppet of Rwanda and Uganda, shifted gears dramatically by severing ties with both nations and asserting his control, effectively converting his presidency into a dictatorship. This defiance prompted the Rwandan and Ugandan governments to launch another invasion in 1998, sparking the Second Congo War. This bloody conflict, which extended until 2003, was devastating. It led to millions of deaths, largely due to malnutrition and disease, with estimates suggesting that 1,700,000 Congolese perished from 1998 to 2000 alone. Amid this chaos, the Congolese democracy movement faced dual threats: Kabila's authoritarian regime at home and the continual menace of foreign invasion. In an attempt to consolidate power, Kabila banned political parties, effectively splintering the opposition. This fragmentation meant that while some groups focused on resisting Kabila's despotic rule, others directed their efforts towards repelling external threats. The resistance manifested in various forms. Civil society organizations pursued nonviolent protest, whereas groups like the Mai Mai and Simba resorted to armed rebellion. Nevertheless, these efforts were hampered by a lack of resources and a coherent political structure, diminishing their impact on shaping a democratic Congo. The assassination of Laurent Kabila in 2001, under mysterious circumstances, by his bodyguard, a child soldier named Rashidi Kasereka, marked another turbulent chapter in Congo's history. His son, Joseph Kabila, promptly succeeded him, continuing the legacy of precarious leadership. The enduring strife underscores a poignant lesson. The genuine democratization of Congo is imperative not only for the equitable distribution of resources and upholding human rights, but also for establishing lasting peace and stability. The author, writing in 2002, championed the revival of a national dialogue akin to the aspirations of the earlier CNS, seeing it as essential for guiding the nation toward a democratic future. Such a transformation requires more than just dialogue. It demands a concerted effort from both the DRC and the international community to reject violent authoritarian solutions and instead embrace reconciliation, inclusivity, and justice. These principles must anchor Congo's journey forward, offering hope that despite its fraught history, a peaceful and democratic Congo can ultimately prevail. Final summary. The turbulent history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo throughout the 20th century reveals a persistent pursuit of democracy by its people, against a backdrop of relentless external intervention. From the era of King Leopold II to the influences of international powers such as the United States and neighboring countries like Rwanda, external entities have consistently imposed their political and economic agendas under various guises, from humanitarian aid to political support. These interventions have often exacerbated the country's challenges instead of resolving them, undermining the efforts of the Congolese to establish a governance system that truly reflects their needs and aspirations. The Congolese experience underscores a critical lesson. For the nation to thrive and meet the basic needs of its populace, it must forge a path towards genuine democracy. This means developing electoral processes and governance systems that are determined and directed by its citizens, not external powers. Achieving this will require substantial effort, commitment, and a radical shift in both national and international approaches to governance in the Congo. The future of the Congo hinges on its ability to embrace these changes, fostering a political environment where the voices of the ordinary Congolese are heard and heeded, paving the way for a stable and democratic society. Thank you for joining me today on this journey of learning and discovery as we explored the insights of another thought-provoking book in our growing library of knowledge. If you've enjoyed our time together, please take a moment to follow our podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and share 20-minute books with other knowledge seekers. Your support truly means a lot. Don't forget to join me again in the next episode, where we will delve into another enriching book. Until then, happy reading and happy listening.